So yeah, my name is Gabriel. I work for a company called West Corporation. I've actually been coming to this meetup for like 2+ years now, so it's weird to be on this side of the podium now, but hopefully I do okay. So I'm curious from the start, how many of you are not currently working with React? That's not that many, actually. And those of you who aren't, do you want to be? Yeah, okay. All right, let's see. So this is basically about the last, I don't know, year and a half of my work at my company. So I'm a software developer at West Digital Media Solutions. You probably have not heard of us at all, but if you have ever dialed 911 or received a text from your pharmacy about your prescription being ready to pick up, or been on a conference call, you've probably used our other services. DMS is a new division of the company. We focus primarily on webcasting. The product I work on is called Multimedia Center, or MMC, and it actually originated in Nuremberg, Germany back in like 2004, I believe. And they intended it originally to be used for webcasting concerts, and that didn't work out. A bunch of companies actually became their primary audience and customers, so they ended up using that for their financial quarterly results, webcasts, and town halls and things like that. Today we run over 30,000 events a year for over 5,000 different companies. We're the leading investor relations webcasting platform in the world. We run internal communications events like town halls and some PR events as well. Our product is used for both audio and video events. Often the webcast is tied into a conference call or a live on-site video stream, so participants can dial in or access it on their phone or desktop. On top of the streaming media, we provide a variety of additional features like slide presentations, interactive polling, quizzes, QA, comments, all that kind of stuff. So when MMC was first created, Flash was like dominating media streaming on the web, and that's how our front end was built back then. In fact, parts of the back end were built using Flash too. There was a tool to customize the Flash presentations using Flash itself, which was pretty cool. But 2007, Apple released the iPhone and killed Flash. So by about 2010, most streaming media sites started providing HTML5 video streams, and then around 2015, YouTube and others pretty much switched over to HTML5 entirely, and Flash was effectively dead. So the writing was on the wall. We had a separate, albeit limited, HTML5 front end for our webcast player that was created for mobile devices specifically to fill that gap. In the interim, didn't have all the features that our desktop application had, but it worked. In 2015, when I joined the company, which back then was actually part of NASDAQ, they were investing heavily in rewriting or updating all of their platforms. So preparations were being made to begin a project in 2016 to rewrite the webcast player front end using HTML5 and get rid of Flash. I was not involved in the project from the start. Our team was actually split, working on two major rewrite projects. So we were rewriting both the webcast player front end as well as the administrative console back end system, which was used to set up these events. And that we needed to upgrade from Sencha's XJS 3 framework to XJS 6, which was 3 was very obsolete and long in the tooth. So that was the first time I'd actually worked with a JavaScript framework, which was quite an eye-opening experience for me. But that also led me into kind of figuring out what else was going on in the JavaScript community, because I had, prior to that primarily been a PHP developer, and it was really kind of fascinating to see what was going on there. So I started learning about other frameworks like React. I picked them up and started learning on the side, coming to these meetups and conferences. NASDAQ also provided us free access to Pluralsight, so I was able to take some React courses and get to learn how to use it. So throughout 2016, I was focused on rewriting our console and bringing it to feature parity with our legacy product. And then in 2017, we wrapped up both of those projects, and we're preparing to move on to new projects. The developer who was in charge of the player was moving on to a different project, so I ended up picking that up and taking over for him, and then managed both of the different front-end projects that we had. I got to spend 2 weeks on site with him, basically learning everything I could about how our player system worked, and then took over that project and focused on that for the rest of the year. So our legacy system was Flash, so obviously the code was written in ActionScript. And as some of you know, ActionScript is actually a part of, or a version of the ECMAScript standard, which JavaScript also is. That created an opportunity for us to take advantage of the code similarities and effectively ease the transition from Flash to JavaScript by rewriting a lot of the architecture pretty much the same way that it worked before. So even with the blueprint of the legacy app in place, the migration from Flash to HTML5 was complex and essentially became a whole new application. There was a lot to be done and a very limited time budget. I had asked them early on, since I'd already been working with React and Vue, if they were going to use something like that, but they basically did not have time to do that. So they chose technologies they were familiar with. And that, maybe it would have been better if we had, but sometimes you just have to make those trade-offs when you're in a time crunch. It did kind of work to our advantage in this case because we were able to produce something very quickly and get it out there, and then later on we were able to gradually improve on it. So the architecture for that application was actually a custom imperative object-oriented framework that was mostly built using Jquery, Handlebars, and Require.js was the build system. The dependencies were actually kept inside our source tree as like static copies. We did not use NPM because at that time it did not work on our corporate network, which was kind of a pain. It worked, but that was pretty annoying. And I don't know if any of you have ever worked with AMD modules and Require.js, but managing like the order of the dependencies at the top of it, it's just so verbose and crazy. I really did not like it. So the first step when I came on was to get rid of a lot of that. I migrated over to Webpack and Babel, so then we would have the ability to use ES6 and later versions of JavaScript and all the lovely features that come with them. Eventually I did win my battle against our corporate network and get NPM to start working. And then I was able to add unit testing, which we initially used Karma and Mocha, and then converted to Jest. So at that point it was at least a more modern application. One core focus from the product management team was that the front end had to be a single application that worked very well in both mobile and desktop, which meant obviously having a responsive UI. We had a somewhat responsive version of the legacy Flash player, but as I understand, that was actually a constant source of problems. It seemed that mixing highly customizable UI with responsive behavior was really not easy. Initially, we also had to pare down the customization options for the player in order to achieve feature parity quickly. So in the previous system, as I said, we had a Flash-based layout system for that, so you could actually just drag and drop the UI elements wherever you wanted to put them. With the new UI, we focused on using the generally accepted patterns in modern applications. Since we didn't provide the fully customizable layout anymore, we had a set of pre-designed layouts that users could choose from. All navigation and for our functionality was moved into a responsive menu bar at the top of the screen, which had some customization, company logo, colors, things like that. The media clip, the main portion of our application, and other feature modules were presented in the main area below that, and our controls for the playback were in the footer at the bottom. The layout options basically just controlled like how the media clip and other modules were arranged in the main area. The simplified layout system was a lot easier to implement at first, but there were problems with that. The logic to manage those layouts was contained mostly in like one large class, and then that kind of reached into some other portions of code, and there were all these weird interdependencies in numerous parts of the system. Over time, as they asked us to add more functionality to the system, it became kind of an unmanageable mess. For every feature we added, we frequently created new bugs. And it really ended up taking a lot of time and extreme care to add features without breaking everything else. So at some point, I kind of, after dealing with a lot of those issues, I realized, like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we managing all this rendering ourselves? Like Jquery creating DOM and looping over that, and using Handlebars templates. Like, all this has been done already by proven systems out there. So why don't we just use one of those? And if we replaced our rendering system with an existing framework, then we kind of get the opportunity to potentially cut out an entire class of bugs there and allow us to focus on more impactful work. So we might have had an easier time with the transition if we'd started with React or Vue or what have you. We may not have had these problems. We might have had different problems, but we just, what it boiled down to is we didn't have the time. And at this point, it was the strain from that was starting to show. So we had a working application, but we also had a lot of issues with it. And we kind of knew what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed. So in the fall of 2017, after I attended the first, I believe, was React Boston conference here, I discussed the idea with my team of migrating to a UI framework and suggested, let's pick React or Vue. I've been playing around with both of them. The team chose React primarily based on its ubiquity. With their acceptance, I began working on a prototype. So normally the first few years of my employment there, like in the last week of the year, like everyone else was gone on vacation, and I would take that time and just work from home and get a bunch of stuff done, like cranking out fixes for tech debt and stuff like that. So I spent that last week of 2017 working on a prototype for using React in our player, and I just took like one little component and migrated it over to React and hooked things up so that it would work within our existing framework. So just took this one thing, which was a social sharing component from a control bar that allowed you just click on it, it gives you a menu of Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And I built a React version of that. The Handlebars template I converted to JSX. I changed the Vue code to call React DOM.render, passed the data in as props to the JSX, and then any further calls to the render function would basically just make React re-render it. But React is also smart enough when you call React DOM multiple times, it just doesn't update, essentially. So it's smart enough to not completely re-render everything. So I wrapped up that component in an error boundary component as well, because we had sometimes problems with our code where they, if there was an error in one component, it would crash the entire application, just brings the whole JS stack to a halt. And the error boundary system in React was a great way to easily contain these problems and avoid them without breaking the entire application. So I showed that to my team. They liked it. I kind of started talking with product management about it. They were receptive to the idea, and then I decided to make an actual proposal for them. So the catalyst for that was Corey House's Pluralsight course, React: The Big Picture, where he kind of goes over the main benefits of React, not just for developers, but things you can kind of explain, like the benefits of it to your company as well. There's a lot of great information in that, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in something like this, to go watch that course on Pluralsight. So I based my proposal on information in his course, and then also on the State of JavaScript survey results, which kind of make a clear picture, like React is what you should be using. So I also kind of, part of that proposal, came up with a prototype for a React-based responsive version of our UI that did some of the behaviors that our product team wanted to be able to do in the application, but we weren't quite able to pull off with the existing version because of the just awful interdependencies and bugs that we were creating. So that worked pretty well, and they liked that. I presented the proposal to our product management team, who I have to hand it to them. They kind of go above and beyond for us, and it's also great to have a product manager who was one of the original developers of the application, so he actually understands like everything that we're talking about and can totally relate. And when we come to him something like this, he totally understands the need for it. That was fantastic. So they listened, they took our advice to heart, and eventually got the project approved with the company, which was kind of amazing considering we were basically proposing to rewrite the application when we had just finished doing that. So I think one thing that helped also was that we made sure that they understood the source of the problems that we were having in our UI, and they knew that this was something that would fix that. So in January 2018, we got the project approved, and I began work on it. The first steps were basically just going through everything in the application and kind of cataloging all of the different modules in our player for our features, generating a list of components that we would need to create in React. And we use this list to track our time estimates and status over time. I know a lot of people say like Confluence is the place where information goes to die, but that was actually kind of really useful in doing this talk, because I had to go back to that stuff and kind of look through our old documents and tickets and see like, wow, how long did that take? Like, oh, okay, yeah. But it was great to have that information there still. So I also was able to create a sort of coding conventions document that was more of a living document. So along the way, we made modifications to it as we kind of found better ways to do certain things with React. Just to kind of, not really a style guide, but just these are the common things you'll need to do, and this is how you should do them with our code, so that it all kind of looks the same. So we planned the migration in 2 phases. First, we basically just went through all the view components in the player and got React versions working alongside, got React in general working alongside our custom framework, migrated those view components, and then in the second version, once that was done, we would go through and essentially gut the view layer of everything, replace it all with React, rebuild the layout system, and other structural components that we needed to. So there was a lot of experimentation as well, a lot of options to choose from. React has so many different tools and libraries available. It took a lot of time to kind of pick the right ones that we wanted to use, whatever worked best for us. We wanted to get away from our evil global CSS files. We had like 2 files that maintained everything. We wanted to be able to look in like one place and find all the information related to a component. So we decided to migrate to CSS and JS. We tried out both emotion and style components, but picked emotion because of its speed, essentially. Although nowadays, I think with the version 4 or version 5, they're almost exactly the same performance-wise. And so we added guidelines to our coding conventions so that we would write our emotion code in a format that style components can also use, just in case. We had issues with some of the modules maintaining state. So in some of our responsive behaviors when a particular module would be hidden, it would be unmounted from view and then mounted in a different location in the DOM. Unmounting would then nuke the state in the component, and for something like a form input for the comments, your input, whatever you had typed in, would be lost if that happened. So we needed a solution to maintain state between mounting and unmounting components, which normally people would just choose Redux. That seems to be the most popular option for kind of global application state. It's a really simple idea, top-down, one-directional data, data down, actions up, but connecting components via higher-order components, mapping state dispatch, reducers, actions, action creators, all of that. It was what I consider to be too much of a cognitive load for the rest of my team. We needed something that we could start with immediately, and then later on we could add in Redux when we really needed it. So we picked a simpler state management system that basically just mimicked the existing set state API using context. Made it a lot easier for everyone to pick up. They immediately understood how it worked. I won't name it because it's basically a dead project, and we're getting rid of it now and replacing it with hooks using use reducer and use context. So we already had Jest set up for unit testing. I added Enzyme because at the time React testing library didn't exist and Enzyme was the best option. But I did use Kenzie Dodd's data test attribute method for selecting UI elements for tests. That helped us for our unit tests. It also helped our QA team for their automated tests. So at this point, we basically had the groundwork laid. I brought in my other two team members, split up the list of tasks, and we got to work on it. And we finished migrating 8 feature modules in time and shipped a hybrid version of our application with React components in April of 2018. And then we kept working on the rest of the Vue modules through May. But I realized something, that I had made a mistake in estimating some of the code, which I should have caught, and that's probably part of that thing where you basically take any estimate you make, you should just double it. I should have just done that, and that would have been fine. But everyone was okay with it. We kept going, and we began migrating more of the Vue logic into container components. So that was my mistake. I took it on myself to fix it, and I spent about 100 hours of overtime and got us back on track throughout May and June. And then we shipped the next version in July with everything migrated to React, or all the modules at least. So then we had to finish gutting the rest of the Vue system and the layout system and replacing that with React. So now we're ready for phase 2. We split the code base for the React-only component into its own build config, own set of directories, and then we had essentially 2 sets of bundles that we were building every time we built the application, and then just added a URL parameter so that we could go in and select the prior version of the application or the new React version. So that separated everything so we could work on one without affecting the other. Although there were some difficulties towards the end where we were fixing things in the React version, and then we kind of had to backport that into the old version, and it didn't quite match up, but things happen. So then once that was all set up and we were kind of ready to get into the meat of it and rip out the Vue layer, we had to replace Jquery and Handlebars. So most of that was actually not that difficult. We were able to replace some of that with just some NPM packages to replace a few pieces of functionality we needed from Jquery. A lot of it was just replaced with BS6 code because that just did what we already were doing with Jquery. And then we found that a lot of the things that we were using before already existed as React components in NPM. So React Bootstrap, React Time Ago, React Hammer.js, like they were all there and ready to use. So we just put those in and we're ready to go. So part of my proposal was intended to avoid any kind of lock into any one system. So we wanted to pick React, but I also wanted to make it clear to them that we're going to go with React, but we recognize that in the future there could be some other system that we need to use, or there might be other reasons we might want to do this. But we ended up separating out our business logic into its own library of sorts called the player engine. And then the view logic we separated out into another library called the UI, and they were completely separated, and there was a bridge module that was created to link them together. So we had an API from the bridge that allowed the UI to make calls into the engine, and then a signal system that the engine could use to then pass events and other information into the UI through the bridge. So that made it possible to replace React if we ever, for some stupid reason, wanted to. But it also makes it possible for us to use this engine with a new UI if we want to, for a mobile application or desktop or what have you. So once we had the player engine, bridge, and UI completed, we migrated the rest of the U logic into the UI library, and then we had to go actually and add some old features that originally we were allowed to remove from the product, but then some of our customers complained about those not being in there, and they spend a lot of money with us, so we graciously accepted and agreed to re-add those features, which added some time, but we got everything done around September, and then I was ready for our October release. So we had the two fully working player front ends at this point, and we could switch back and forth between them, and that was useful. If we wanted to, we could have used the old version as a fallback in case there was an issue with the React version. But our product management team was actually pretty confident in our work with the React version, so they said, nope, just cut it out, and we got rid of that and got it back to a single build and completely nuked all of our old code. So I did kind of learn some things along the way about things I would do differently. One of the things I think I did that was a mistake was when I was in kind of an eager mode to get things done at the beginning, I went through and migrated a bunch of modules myself at first to have examples for my coworkers to look at when they were working, but I grabbed a bunch of the low-hanging fruit, and I should have done more of the advanced modules that would have different usages of React that they would also need examples of. So that could have made development time take a little bit longer than it should have. It might have gone faster if they had simpler modules to work on at first. I think I also should have separated the project into two completely separate builds from the start. That actually didn't happen until later on, and we were kind of going back and forth between having both versions of code in the same bundle, which caused some problems here and there, and made development a little more difficult than it should have been. And I definitely should have done more frequent code reviews because I was the only one on the team that was really familiar with React. And it's kind of the point where you know how to use something and you forget the problems that you had when you were first starting to use it. So I didn't realize that some of them were having some issues kind of adjusting to the declarative nature of React. For example, falling back to jQuery style imperative code that was grabbing a ref to an element in the JSX and then manually going in and manipulating the DOM instead of just using conditional rendering in their JSX. So the big problem that we had was IE 11. Primarily that we still have to support it, but more that the performance actually was really bad in IE, and this was just kind of right after the initial migration to React, and I mean it's really just the unnecessary re-rendering. It just pegs the UI thread in IE, but I didn't know that at first because it basically would just get really slow or crash a lot, and we didn't know why because anytime I opened up the DevTools profiler, it would just immediately crash. So I couldn't even investigate that, and I ended up having to go through and profile and optimize everything using Chrome and Firefox, which at least those work. Got it to the point where it was I could actually like load it up and let it run in IE, and then IE would work well enough to let me open the DevTools and run the profiler there, and then I was able to fix those other performance issues and make it work pretty much on par. So the main benefits I've found from React have been, really like the main thing is the readily available functionality. Like the React ecosystem, like I already said, it's so massive. Like almost any time that I need some functionality, like it already exists. Whether it's like on NPM or there's actually like a code sandbox that already has some example of this code out there or something. I can just find whatever I need. Like we replaced our pop-up alert system with React Toastify, which works amazingly well and does way better of a job of managing multiple alerts than our original system did. And I really like the idea of encapsulating your content and logic in components. It makes it really easy to reuse and share our code. And it's nice to be able to implement familiar old concepts as well. Like we have some multiple separate components for our layouts now, but there's a shared logic between them. It needs to be able to render all of our the features that someone has added to a webcast event, all the modules for those, and they're all separate components as well. So we essentially have this sort of factory module that you can just pass into a layout, and then it will just take all the module configurations and render them out all for you. In terms of debugging, yeah, it's much easier to locate and resolve our problems. You get really nice stack traces from React. The error boundaries really help. You track things down as well, and also giving us an opportunity to put in a placeholder or something else, or just take out any content if there's a problem there. And React DevTools are amazing. Makes debugging and sort of limited local testing really easy. So you can like go in and manually edit the props and see the changes immediately in the browser. And the stuff that Brian Vaughn is doing on the new version of React DevTools is incredible. The best thing I think is that it now can tell you why components re-rendered, which is a huge help for optimization. So you should definitely, if you don't already, follow him on Twitter and see what he's doing with that. And as we're still iterating on this, we have a lot of things on the plate for the future. So we regularly update our NPM dependencies, probably about quarterly, because it requires us to do a full regression test suite on the product. But we're up to 16.8 now and experimenting with hooks. Although I still do feel like class components are a little easier, especially with like the lifecycle events. But we're working on that. There is work in progress to change our unit tests over to React testing library, so that's been added, and every new test is created using RTL, and old enzyme ones will eventually migrate over and then get rid of that. And then implementing SSR is a big thing that we want to get done because our player loads up and it makes essentially like 2 calls to the server to get all the information it needs, and really that could just be 1 call to the server and then it just gets the data it needs and renders everything and provides it to the browser. But we're not quite set up there, and we're working on a lot of other infrastructure stuff at the moment, so that's sort of off in the future. And then TypeScript is another big thing as well. Our division just launched a brand new application called Unison a couple weeks ago. That's essentially going to be a dashboard that will tie all of our products together for our customers so they can log into one place and access everything that they do with us. When that project started, and it was started by my product manager, I had suggested to him that they also make it a React application so that we can start building a shared component library in the company and start reusing each other's work and benefiting from that. And that worked out. So they are using React and TypeScript, and so we will be following suit and slowly migrating to TypeScript as well. And we are currently working on a shared library system to use in the company and style guide and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's been a year and a half since our project began. I'm really glad that our product management team was receptive to the change and managed to make this happen. And how many companies out there would let you like go and rewrite an application like right after you just rewrote it? And, but the iterative approach, worked out really well for us. We were able to gradually, do the migration and do it at our own pace and not be too rushed. But it also kind of helped us to have the time to learn from our mistakes along the way as well. And it sounds like most of you are already using React, so you're probably not going to do this. You already have, but I just wanted to say, like, for anybody looking to migrate, what worked for us may not work for you, so you don't have to do the exact same thing that we did. But I do kind of hope that this would help other people out there who are looking to make the change. So thanks, and if you are looking to make a proposal to your company to migrate to React, shoot me an email and let me know, and I'll get you some content that hopefully will help you. That's it. Thanks.